Live now is one of the world's foremost economists, public policy commentators, Columbia University professor, Jeffrey Sachs. Professor Sachs, always a pleasure to have you here on NDTV. Thank you very much for being with me here once again. This is, of course, on the back of Trump and then India confirming that they've arrived at a trade deal. We still don't know what the contours of the deal are, but there's much to talk about, not just about the journey till this point, but also what has been said so far and how we understand it. So my first question to you, Professor Sachs, do you see this as a thaw or some kind of a time out? Lots of optics. Do you see this as a trade breakthrough, a genuine reset, or a temporary ceasefire of sorts?
I think it's probably likely to last, because what Trump is doing is backing down from his wars, trade wars all over the world. This is part of that backing down. In other words, Trump came out, guns blazing several months ago, not only against India, but all over the world. He's backing down step by step. So this is basically part of a retrenchment of U.S. policy.
Who do you think conceded? You're saying that this was Trump climbing down. Behind the press releases, which side do you think gave up more? We still don't know, I should say once again, what exactly the details are.
Exactly. We don't know, but I would say in general, the U.S. backed down because, after all, the day before yesterday, the tariff rates were 50%. Now they're 18%. The 50% never made sense. This was a blunder by the United States. Trump's mouth works a lot faster than his brain, and that was what happened in that case. Now the U.S. is basically backed down. There's fine print we don't know, but essentially what happened is the U.S. came out with very high tariffs against many countries. Against India was a big surprise because it violated every strategic principle that should have applied. But now Trump has backed down here as well as in other cases.
Trump has been very clear to say that this is a win for America. In your assessment, Professor Sachs, are these wins sustainable economic outcomes or short-term deals that leave, long-term distortions in their wake? Even members of the White House have, doubled down on the $500 billion figure, which has made a lot of people raise their eyebrows here.
Well, I don't think that anything that Trump says is honest. So there's a lot of bluster. Trump says that trillions and trillions have been promised by other countries. This is basically Trump running off at the mouth. He is an unstable and not very bright person, I have to say. And so we hear a lot of things that simply aren't true. And a lot of the big headlines are just announcements that make him feel good, but that don't really add anything in substance to economic life. All of these promises of who's going to buy what from whom, this has no basis in general. When Trump says that trillions and trillions of dollars have been promised to the U.S. economy, maybe it is other leaders sweet-talking him. Maybe he's not very bright. I don't know what it is, but I don't count it for very much.
What do you make of India's leverage that was used in these negotiations? Do you think that it offers up a big opportunity? China is constrained, Professor Sachs, and supply chains are shrinking. Is this the strongest hand India has held, in your view, in terms of a global trade negotiation? It's unprecedented what we saw.
I don't think that the U.S. market is so important for India in the future. This may sound surprising because the U.S. has been the goal, replace China in the value chain. But the U.S., while it's a rich economy, accounts for maybe 12% of global trade right now, and it's a slow-growing economy. The big growth is your neighborhood. The big growth is Southeast Asia. The big growth is China, because India and China should be trading with each other. The big growth is in Western Asia, where there's a lot of money in the Gulf. Africa will grow rapidly. So India shouldn't base too much on the U.S. market. It's slow growing and our politics are unstable, whereas it's the emerging economies, the BRICS economies, that are going to be the dynamic economies of the future.
You know, much of this this journey towards this trade deal over the last 8 to 9 months, Professor Sachs, has been about Trump and Modi. You know, both are outsized personalities, very popular in their countries, but conspicuously, Prime Minister Modi here has refused to publicly spar with Trump, even under all this tariff pressure, even in the face of some provocations and some taunts and mocks and things like that. How do you see that? Was that strategic maturity to, just wait it out and let the negotiations happen? Or do you think it may have signaled to Washington and to Trump specifically that pressure actually works?
Well, first, it's not quite the case that both are popular. Prime Minister Modi is very popular, but President Trump is not very popular. Prime Minister Modi's approval ratings are in the 70s or 80s, whereas President Trump's approval ratings are in the 30s. His disapproval ratings are in the 50s. So Trump is an unpopular figure by and large, because we see him for what he is. He's a rather unstable, rude, crude, not very bright guy. This is a big problem. I think that Prime Minister Modi behaved politely. He behaved circumspectly. He got the deal that is pretty good for India in the end, and that is an accomplishment. But the stakes for India are much bigger than the U.S.-Trump issue. India is the presidency of the BRICS this year. That's half the world population. That's basically half the world GDP at this point. So I think Prime Minister Modi's stature is very high, but what's important is that it is good with China, with Russia, with the Southeast Asia, with the African Union. And that is going to prove to be the more important point, not the bilateral relationship of Prime Minister Modi and a rather unpopular and unstable figure in the United States.
And this is going to be a difficult tightrope walk, as you may understand, Professor Sachs, better than anyone else, for India at a time when geopolitics has hijacked global trade, if I may use that word, more than ever before in our lifetime, certainly. So I'm wondering whether India can, in your view, deepen these economic ties with the United States without sliding into a sort of anti-China economic bloc. How do you think India is going to play that tightrope?
I think that's extremely important, what you've just said. India should not allow itself to be used by the United States as an anti-China bludgeon. This is how American leaders think about India. They don't think about India, they think about anti-China. And I've often advocated that India should not be part of the so-called Quad arrangement, for example, which is the United States and India, Japan, and Australia against China. India is just too big, too important, too major a country to be used by another country. It should have its own independent foreign policy that, in my view, should be absolutely on normal relations with China and the United States and Russia, and not allow the United States to try to use India against Russia or against China.
Yeah. Final question, Professor Sachs, is the issue of Russian oil, where Trump and members of his team have said that India is committed to stop buying Russian oil, which is not true. And that goes to the point where you said that not everything that comes out of President Trump and the White House can be fully trusted or authenticated. And we're hearing from our government that that's actually not true. India will continue to get its energy depending on market prices. It will keep people's interests first, but it has committed, however, to purchasing energy from non-sanctioned entities. This is also a bit of a tightrope walk, you believe, because Trump has made it a sort of key issue for trade negotiations to move forward, the whole Ukraine war and Russian oil item.
First, the Ukraine war was started by the United States by pushing NATO enlargement. It was not started by Russian provocation. It was started by the United States. So this has been a U.S. geopolitical game. Second, these sanctions are U.S. sanctions. They're not UN sanctions. And the U.S. does not have the right to dictate world trade terms. This, in my view, is why the BRICS are so important. The BRICS as a group should say to the United States, no, you keep your sanctions to yourself. We'll trade as we see fit. We'll do it politely, but you cannot dictate world trade terms. You cannot dictate how we trade with each other. This is a very basic point that I think is very important for the BRICS countries.
Final question, Professor Sachs. How does India emerge from these negotiations looking? The simple way that a lot of people here look at it is that India has held on to its demands. It stood up to a proverbial bully. It has refused to give concessions despite a lot of American pressure. Your view of how India has ended up looking?
This is a fine agreement. It's what maturity brings about. India was just steadfast. It's no miracle. It's no strategic alliance with the United States. It is what it is. The U.S. has backed down from outrageous claims that it made last year. That's a good thing.
Professor Jeffrey Sachs, always a pleasure. Thank you very much for speaking to NDTV.